Even the most brilliant minds are left stumped by the world's most bizarre enigmas. These events often defy all rational explanation, leaving behind puzzles that only intrigue us. Number 10. The 29th of July in 1965 was not a good day for Gothenburg, Sweden's gateway to the world. It was on this day that 3 separate incidents would be documented, leaving behind unexplainable mysteries. It started off like any other day, aside from some light rain. This was, of course, before the inexplicable happened. The mysteries would kick off with 3 friends who worked at the local shipyards. Gay Carlson, Jan Olaf Dalsio, and Kjell Johansson were described as loyal and trustworthy individuals who would occasionally find themselves in minor trouble with the police. On the 28th of July, the day before, Jan left his mother's house wearing a brown suit, blue socks, and black shoes. He claimed that he'd be going camping with some friends. On the 29th, Kjell and Jan visited a friend, but after that, their day went mostly undocumented. In the early morning hours, that regular day would go awry when the friends decided to take Jan's older brother's car, a midnight blue Volvo PV444, out for a drive, even though neither of them had their license at the time. It's presumed that they had taken the vehicle to get to their camping destination, but this would never be known. Just after noon that day, the trio congregated at a cafe. It was reported that Jan, Kjell, and Gay left the establishment around 3 p.m. This would be the last reported sighting of the 3. Soon after departing from the cafe, with Gay in the driver's seat, all 3 friends, along with the midnight blue Volvo, vanished without a trace. It wasn't until months later that the police would tie the 3 disappearances together, since each man had been reported missing at different times, when in actuality they'd seemingly vanished together. Despite extensive searches of the bodies of water throughout Gothenburg, nothing ever turned up. The Volvo has never been accounted for, and there have been no indications that it suffered a car crash or plummeted into the water. Each of the men had salaries waiting for them back at the shipyard, but they went uncollected. Jan, Gay, and Kjell each had girlfriends at the time of their disappearance, and Kjell had recently become a father. Things about the disappearance only got stranger from here, though. Gay's sister had observed something odd sometime after the vanishings. While looking for her brother at his apartment, a stranger came to the door after she knocked. The man was wearing a knitted sweater that she had made for her brother. He appeared visibly stressed and then told her to look for him at a local bar, but despite doing this, Gay and the others were never found. In just a matter of hours after they were last seen, the 3 men sparked an enduring mystery, but this wouldn't be the last strange thing to happen that day in Gothenburg. In that same area, on that same day, an art student from Stockholm, 18-year-old Hubner Lundqvist, vanished without a trace. He'd spent the summer of '65 with his family at their holiday residence in Torekov, but Hubner had become bored there and decided to travel north of Gothenburg, where more artists lived. The route that he would have taken travels through Gothenburg, after which he may have taken a train or possibly accepted a ride from strangers along the road. After departing his home that morning, Hubner arrived in Gothenburg just a few hours later and sent a postcard to his parents that read, "All is well, don't worry." This was the last trace of Hubner, and he was never seen again. Given the idea that he may have accepted a ride from a passerby, the idea that he might have met up with the 3 other missing men remains a possibility. Then there was the Frogman heist, a strange bank robbery. On the same day as the 4 enigmatic disappearances, 2 men, one of whom was dressed as a woman, stormed a bank in Gothenburg. This would happen at around 2 that afternoon. The 2 assailants burst through the door with submachine firearms, firing wildly at the ceiling. A bank customer, who was also a wrestler, tackled one of the men, forcing him to the ground. This act led to the assailant firing at his own leg. Despite the efforts of customers and bank employees, the robbers were able to make their getaway with heaps of money. Employees chased the men down, trying to figure out where they went or where they were going. The robbers made their way down to the river and took off the clothes that they were wearing, revealing scuba diving gear underneath. Despite trying to subdue the men, they seemed to make their escape, but police soon caught up with them, as well as a 3rd accomplice. The men were identified as Hungarian citizens. Police, amateur sleuths, and reporters have tried to connect all 3 cases over the years, but their efforts have proved futile. It's been 60 years since that strange, mystery-filled day, and we're no closer to any answers. Number 9. Born in 1972, Kelly Sue Ackerknecht was raised in Johnstown, New York, alongside one of her younger brothers. For unspecified reasons, her other 5 siblings were raised in other homes, 2 of whom she would only meet in 2004. In 1997, the woman fell in love with a man named Jason, and they got married 2 years later. The pair then had a daughter together and moved into Jason's family home located at 330 West Main Street. It was the 30th of September in 2008. She'd been working a closing shift as the supervisor at Rite Aid, located at Route 30 and Market Streets, which is now an MCT credit union. During that year, the almost perfect life was beginning to fall apart. Jason was out of work on disability, and the pair were suffering unspecified marital troubles. Kelly Sue's home was located just 12 miles away, and she clocked out of work at 9:45 that evening. After speaking with coworkers about plans to meet up the following morning for breakfast, the 35-year-old climbed into her green Saturn and drove away, never to be seen again. It would have taken her just 15 minutes to arrive at her home, but she never did. 4 hours later, at 1:53 a.m., a police officer was on routine patrol when he came across the Saturn belonging to Kelly Sue. It was abandoned in a dead-end parking area in a neighborhood known as Frog Hollow, just 30 seconds away from her house. Upon its discovery, the car was engulfed in flames. The officer waited for the flames to subside before opening the driver's door. Kelly Sue was not inside, and there was no trace of her either. When the fire was doused, not much had been left of the vehicle, aside from a melted, residue-covered melted frame. The steering wheel, seats, and tires had all been incinerated. Police then headed to the Ackerknecht home to rouse Jason and tell him of the fire. It's assumed that the officers had informed the husband that his wife was missing, after which he invited them to search his home. Jason had waited up for Kelly Sue that night, eventually retiring at around midnight, only to be awoken sometime later with the news of the vehicle fire. It's suggested that upon hearing of the fire, Jason reported his wife missing, but the exact sequence of this report is unclear. Once a missing person report had been established, though, the Johnstown Police Department began looking for the missing woman. Search efforts included canine units that were called into action on the very evening that Kelly Sue had vanished. As the search continued in the days to follow, the number of search hounds increased. Just a week after the disappearance, the police department called in the Capital District Canine Group, and a grid search was conducted. They later did a helicopter survey of the wooded areas that surrounded the Ackerknecht home. These efforts, though, yielded no results. Investigators followed up with multiple leads and chased down tips as far as Syracuse. The department had even consulted with a psychic, but this too would be futile. The lead detective, Chief Gilbo, went as far as contacting the FBI, believing that an Alaskan serial homicide assailant was on the loose. It's been suggested that Gilbo was referring to Israel Keys, but he was found to have been in the Pacific Northwest and was ruled out as a possible suspect. The 1998 Saturn frame has remained in police custody since the evening that Kelly Sue went missing. Detectives and experts from the Office of Fire Prevention and Control were unable to determine the cause of the fire. They also obtained another 2 such vehicles and set them alight, revealing that they had burned in the same manner, leaving only a metal frame behind. Adding another layer of mystery to the case is that Kelly Sue's brother, Tom, had stated that the car's driver's seat was pushed too far back to accommodate his sister's preferred driving position, and the route that she had taken was not her routine one. Information regarding this missing person can be directed to the Johnstown Police Department at 518-736-4020. Number 8. Camilla Bini, a quiet and independent woman, was born in Somalia to an Italian father and a Somali mother. Together with her parents and sister Juliana, they moved to Italy. Here, she would attend school and later found herself working at a stamp company in Turin. After a turning point in her life, Camilla was able to become independent enough to live alone in a small apartment. Anyone who knew her described her as educated, reserved, and polite. She was also said to be determined at her job. Camilla's autonomous life, though, would come to a screeching halt in the summer of 1989. She had disappeared. August is a popular time among Italian residents to head off during the summer holidays. Often, cities are left abandoned, quiet, and take on a ghost town appearance as huge gatherings of people flock to mountain resorts or seaside destinations. It was during this time, according to Juliana, that Camilla was planning on visiting friends 600 miles south of Turin. A family friend had also invited the 34-year-old to accompany them to Liguria, but decided not to go. The details regarding Camilla's disappearance are unclear, since it occurred during the holiday period. It's known with utmost certainty that she'd last been seen on the 8th of August that year. Her neighbor had been the last one to see her, and had invited her into the flat for a drink. The two'd met around 6:30 that evening, after which the neighbor departed for her summer holiday. No one had noticed that Camilla was missing until 20 days later when she was supposed to be back at work. On the 28th of August, at 9:30 that morning, the missing woman's employer made contact with her family and reported her missing from the workplace. Relatives then headed to her apartment in search of her and found 2 used coffee cups, one of which had lipstick on the rim, as well as 2 glasses. The items were sitting on the kitchen table, but Camilla was nowhere to be seen. They then phoned friends and acquaintances, asking around if anyone had seen her. When these efforts proved fruitless, Juliana reported her missing at a local police station. With knowledge of the unwashed dishes, police suspected that Camilla had been visited by someone on the day that she disappeared, but neither of the items had been checked for fingerprints. The police department, aside from not dusting for fingerprints, had thoroughly investigated the case but had come up empty. Later, a popular Italian TV show began investigating the disappearance, and in 2003 they made a potentially shocking revelation. Camilla had plans to leave Turin with a coworker, Beatrice Della Croce. They were planning on a summer holiday. Beatrice was the girlfriend of Paolo Stropiana, who'd been placed under police radar following the vanishing of a speech therapist. After this discovery, the police returned to the case. According to neighbors, they'd seen Paolo and Beatrice visiting Camilla for dinner on more than one occasion. This, paired with the newfound knowledge that she was planning a holiday with them, placed Stropiana under suspicion. Beatrice would tell officers that her friend had changed her summer holiday plans and that they made no travel arrangements together. This brought the investigation to a daunting stop, with Stropiana never being investigated. No one else has been named a person of interest, and to this day, the disappearance of Camilla Bini remains a mystery. Number 7. It was the 26th of March, 1962. The Ocala Star-Banner newspaper released a troubling story. 4 teenage skin divers still missing after raft is abandoned. The 5 friends, including Bradford Rice, Warren Felly, Eric Rule, Larry Stewart Bill, and Edward McClearly, had clambered onto a 7-foot Air Force life raft and were setting out to the USS Massachusetts, the above-water vessel wreckage that lies 2 miles from the coast. The weather was perfect and not a single cloud was in the sky. Given the calmness of the waters, the group would take turns paddling the raft towards the wreck. Suddenly, the weather took a drastic turn, with white caps forming on the water and the sky becoming gray. As the breeze began to strengthen, the group gave up on their venture to reach Massachusetts and instead made way for the shore. But most of them wouldn't make it there. The tide picked up and began pushing the raft out into the open ocean. 2 of the young men jumped into the water and tried pushing their raft to shore. When this effort proved futile, they gave up. Another boat entered the vicinity, but despite trying to wave it down, it didn't stop. They then tried to get to a nearby buoy, but this failed too. Darkness filled the sky, and the rain and wind picked up. Thick fog rolled in, and suddenly the waves, wind, and rain stopped. McClearly described the scene as eerily silent. Not a wave rippled, not a seagull called. He was terrified. Rice believed that they'd already succumbed to the elements, but Rule assured them that they were very much alive. Just then, the low rumble broke the silence, followed by a large splash 40 feet away. Then something described as a telephone pole rose 10 feet from the water and emitted a high-pitched whine. At this point, the group panicked and dove into the water, the surface of which was now brown and slimy. As they tried to swim towards the shore, one by one, the group began to disappear. First, it was Rice, then Felly. McClearly soon realized that Bill was no longer swimming alongside them, and then Rule vanished too. Much to his surprise, McClearly made it to the shore, but doesn't remember how. He would later awake in the Pensacola Naval Base Hospital. He relayed the event to the director of search and rescue, but was told that none of his friends had been found. McClearly's written account ends with him claiming to have had a mental breakdown, but recovered and resumed life. His account of the mass vanishing of the group leaves many questions behind. What happened to them? Was it a case of mass hysteria? Why was McClearly the only one who made it out? And what was the 10-foot-long pole that broke through the water? Number 6. Fred Gist was born in 1909 and grew up in California, where he would remain a lifelong inhabitant. On the 19th of August, he and 3 friends set out for a fishing trip in Kings Canyon National Park. The group was made up of Fred, Abe Brazil, Bob Osborne, and Bud Coiner, as well as an unnamed hired stockpacker who supplied their first campsite. The men would venture to their first destination, which was believed to be Simpson Meadow, a 5-day round trip. Kings Canyon was known to be administered by the National Park Service, along with the neighboring Sequoia National Park. The park contains vast wilderness, wooded areas, and rough terrain. The party departed from Road's End and headed along Copper Creek Trail. The first 4 miles was a steep climb, with very little shade and water. According to a few sources, Fred was the one leading the group that day and had taken this route just 2 years prior. Despite knowing where to go, the group overshot their designated campsite. The stockpacker had just dropped supplies off at the campsite and was able to catch up with the men to inform them that they'd gone too far out. They were told to return to the campsite for the night. Fred, by this time, was complaining of exhaustion and did not want to backtrack, but agreed to send his horse back with them. The group didn't have many supplies and could only leave Fred with a few items. They gave him a backpack that held bread, jam, cheese, and a light covering. The group agreed to convene in the general area the next day, and the man further down the trail, which was already sitting at a staggering 9,000 feet. The group, without Fred, headed to their arranged campsite and returned to the area the next morning. But Fred was nowhere to be seen, with the only trace of him being the remains of a campfire, some food items from his backpack, and shoe prints, all of which littered a 50-yard circumference of the fire. With urgency, the friends called out for Fred, but they would receive no response. Thinking that he had continued hiking down the path, the party decided to press on too, hoping they'd find him. 3 days after starting their journey, they'd arrived at Simpson Meadow, but there was still no sign of Fred. But the group could not report him missing until a park ranger arrived there, which he only had the following day. From Simpson Meadow, it would be another 8 miles into the woods to get to the closest ranger station, which was located at LeConte Canyon at the time. Following the missing person report, officials conducted a search and rescue effort that enlisted the aid of dog teams, helicopters, and 30 park rangers. Aside from the campfire remains, no other trace of Fred was found. As searches proved futile, efforts were scaled back, and the man remained missing. Fred Gist disappeared at the age of 66 years old. He stood at a height of 6 feet and weighed around 190 pounds. He would be over 100 years old today, but no body belonging to the missing man was ever found, leaving behind a strange mystery. Number 5. Beyond Belief, Fact or Fiction was a TV series that began in 1997. The show's host, Jonathan Frakes from Star Trek, would tell viewers that they were about to hear 5 mysterious stories and had to guess which ones were fact and which of them were fiction. At the end of the episode, it was revealed which of the stories were true and which were mere fabrications. Mixed in with the terrible puns was an air of pure mystery, with each story being just as odd as the next. Many of the tales that ended up being true seemed almost impossible, such as the case of one story from Season 2, Episode 12, with some features of the plot slightly exaggerated. Graffiti was the 5th and final story of that episode, which was revealed as completely factual by the end of it, much to the disbelief of viewers. The plot took viewers back to 1941, when Harvey Block, the principal of Ambrose Bierce High School, was informed of a desecration that occurred in the recently poured cement. Written in the now dry cement was the message, "Remember Pearl Harbor." This, of course, was referring to the Pearl Harbor attack, but there was just one problem. The attack didn't happen yet. The series makes it seem as though the graffiti had come just 2 days prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor, but the real story suggests that it was 2 years prior, in 1939, which is even stranger. In fact, this didn't take place at the Ambrose Bierce High School either, but rather outside of Owensville High School in Indiana. It also wasn't written in wet cement, but white chalk, spelling out "Remember Pearl Harbor." 2 years later, the Japanese would commence their attack on the United States naval base. The TV series would go on to suspect that Harvey had a suspect in mind and called in one of the students, whose name was Johnny Evans. During his talk with the supposed delinquent, the principal cracks open the students' books, only to find that their pages are all scrawled with the same message. The 3 daunting words also littered the pages of the school's Code of Conduct book. Harvey's car was not safe either, with the words spray-painted in red across it. Johnny Evans, of course, is a false name used in the retelling of the story, and the real person behind the messages remains a mystery to this day. Despite the graffiti being seen by more than 400 people that day, no one saw a suspect, and there are no images of it either. The next morning, the chalk was washed away by heavy rain, and it was as though it never even happened. Number 4. It was the morning of the 28th of August, 1934, a routine day for Deputy Warden Ellsworth Arthur Teed. That morning, he told his wife Alma that he was heading out to investigate an allegation of a poached out-of-season deer. He left his Mullen, Idaho home, indicating that he'd return later that afternoon for a funeral that was being held in town. Teed had claimed that he'd be heading to the Boulder Gulch region, where the supposed sighting of the poached deer was seen. He departed the home at 7:30 a.m. to confront the hunters about their illegal activities. It turned out they'd actually poached 3 deer and game birds during the off-season. The morning drifted on, and afternoon drew in. Teed had not returned home, nor had he attended the aforementioned funeral. As evening fell, with still no sign of him, Alma grew increasingly concerned, especially since her husband was very particular about notifying her of his intentions. She subsequently reported him missing. An immediate search was conducted with desperation. Being a game warden was not a safe job. It didn't take long for the search teams to discover Teed's vehicle, which was parked alongside Mullen Cemetery at the base of Boulder Gulch. Inside was his lunch and coat. Located not far from the car was a handkerchief belonging to the now missing man. Signs of a struggle were strewn amongst the several deer carcasses, but Teed was nowhere to be seen. The warden himself was a sportsman, so he took his position in the field very seriously. According to all who knew him, including fellow police officers, he was a very effective game warden. Teed was well known among the locals, who often helped him with tips on possible poaching activity, which is how he came to learn of the illegal activities that were taking place at the Gulch. From the moment he stepped out of his car, one can only speculate as to what happened to him. More than 1,000 officers, volunteers, and other rescue personnel scoured the area for weeks, but still there was nothing. There was no evidence, no boot print, and no drop of vital fluid belonging to Teed. It was the largest scale search of its time, making use of state resources. An aerial search was short-lived, and the boat rescue operation yielded no results. Eventually, the bloodhounds were called in. As they picked up on the warden's scent, the hounds were hot on the trail and pulled their guides along with them as they made their way through the area. But once they reached the second ridge of the Boulder Gulch, the trail went cold in an open field. As the dogs nosed around, police officers scoured the field for any discernible evidence, but there was nothing. The search team left the area, exhausted and empty-handed. In the vicinity where the game warden had last been seen, police did find something ominous, though. 3 shallow graves yielded evidence of 3 deer and feathers. The hunters that Teed was planning on confronting that day were never identified or questioned. By the following week, officers and search teams felt defeated and hopeless. Teed was just gone. Despite monetary rewards, missing person posters, and renewed appeals, no tips as to the game warden's whereabouts came in, and he remains missing to this day. Number 3. For the British Midlands, the Hollinwell Show was a tradition. It was an annual event that was held at the Hollinwell Showground near Kirkby. In 1980, the show was due to take place on the 13th of July, a Sunday. The Forest League of Juvenile Jazz Bands planned to use the show to host a charity event and created a junior brass and marching band competition, attracting entrants from all over the East Midlands. Coaches from across the area, up to 65 kilometers away, had brought in their bands. By that morning, there were 500 members from 11 bands in attendance, and the show was to commence at 9 a.m. By this time, the marching bands would be tired from their lengthy journeys and were nervous about performing. Then something strange happened. At 10:30, they began collapsing all over the place. There seemed to be no apparent explanation, and it also seemed as though the fainting was contagious, as it even affected the coaches. Witnesses later reported how the amount of ailing individuals quickly jumped into the hundreds. Those in attendance began complaining of sore eyes and throats with the onset of nausea and dizziness. One of the band members, a young girl, described one of her symptoms as feeling as though there were no bones in her arms or legs, and she had a throbbing headache. The victims of this mysterious illness quickly jumped to 300, affecting adults, children, and even babies. More than 200 of the affected were taken to nearby hospitals, including Queen's Medical Center in Nottingham and Chesterfield Hospital. 9 of the sufferers were kept overnight. Others remained there for days. As the strange occurrence continued, hospitals had to turn patients away and redirect the ailing people to other medical centers because they were at maximum capacity with the number of sufferers that were piling in. Things got even stranger from here when one investigation found that several horses in the vicinity had also taken ill. The investigation also revealed that members of the bands were wearing tight-fitting uniforms and didn't all collapse at once, but rather in batches of 5 to 6 at a time in a matter of 3 hours. Doctors and other medical experts couldn't figure out what was causing this sickness, which only sparked a number of other theories that have risen over the years. Such theories ranged from mass hysteria to gas leaks and even pesticides from nearby fields. The exact cause of the widespread illness is still disputed today, as no explanation was ever confirmed for this sudden and harrowing event. Number 2. What happened to Marty? This is the question when it comes to the enigmatic vanishing of Martha Lavon Evans, nicknamed Marty. It was the 10th of February in 1990, the day of her friend's wedding, which she'd be attending as her bridesmaid. As the wedding ceremony ended, attendees moved to the reception at the High Caliber Room Lounge in Napa, Oregon. The 33-year-old woman accompanied them after having locked her purse in the trunk of the bride's vehicle. Guests were chatting and congratulating the newlyweds when Marty informed some of her friends that she needed to leave. She'd only attended the reception for a short period when Marty claimed that she needed to make a trip to Warrenton, Oregon to pick something up. The bridesmaid promised to be back within an hour and left the reception at 9:30 that evening, leaving her purse behind in the truck. On this night, Marty had been using a borrowed vehicle, a 1984 brown Ford Ranger. The vehicle was unmistakable given its dented bodywork and the 7-Up sticker in the window, also bearing the number plate PNB116. Marty had left the venue in this vehicle and was sighted at a gas station outside of Astoria. According to a witness, he was on the payphone and apparently visibly upset and crying. This would be the last time that Marty and the unmistakable truck would ever be seen. Not only was the borrowed vehicle an obvious type that wouldn't go unnoticed, but the missing woman also had various distinguishable characteristics. For one, she was wearing a bridesmaid dress, a strapless, backless maroon and black silk and lace dress paired with a black leather jacket, nylon stockings, black heels, and a twisted gold earring. She also had numerous tattoos. The family had tried to report Marty's disappearance when she failed to return to the function, but the authorities dismissed the case, claiming that she left of her own accord. But the woman had taken nothing with her, including her purse, and never returned to claim any of her belongings either. It wasn't until 2005 that an official missing person report was actually filed, prompting Detective Matt Beeson to take the case. Marty's sister, Linda, had stated that there was never an investigation into her disappearance because the police wouldn't accept a missing person report at the time. The year that a file was finally opened for the disappearance of Martha Evans, Beeson took DNA from relatives for any future comparisons. But to this day, though, the case remains unsolved. Information can be directed to the Oregon State Police at 503-325-5515. Number 1. The curious case of Wang Yanqiu sounds like something out of a science fiction novel. His story sounds impossible, attracting skeptics and deniers from all over. Huang was born in 1956 in the Hebei province of China. By 1977, he was 21 years old. Huang was still working as a farmer and had recently become engaged with the intention of marrying his fiancée after harvest season. The couple had recently begun the project of building their new home. On the 27th of July that year, the farmer had finished up some work for the day and went to sleep in his unfinished home. The following morning, the village awoke to startling news. Huang was nowhere to be found. Villagers were alarmed by this disappearance and began a massive search effort to try and locate him. This, though, was fruitless, and no trace of the man was found. The sudden vanishing specifically concerned his family, who claimed that he had never traveled far and allegedly had a primary school level education. The family scoured the local roads, ponds, and cliffs. They even contacted the nearest hospitals and the police, asking if any unidentified bodies had come in. These efforts all proved worthless. 10 days later, on the 6th of August, something strange would happen again. The village committee had gotten a telegram from Shanghai regarding the missing Huang. The message alleged that he was being held in a deportation center and was hoping that someone would come pick him up. It was later discovered that the telegram was late because it had been accidentally sent to the wrong village. Much to the relief of family and friends, Huang was alive and well, but there was just one problem. That telegram had been dated as the 28th of July, 9 a.m., which is less than half a day after he vanished from the village. Upon his return, his fellow inhabitants began to question him, but would receive no fathomable answer. This is because the former missing man had no idea how he ended up so far away from home. He explained that the night before he'd gone to bed, only to awake to loud sounds in the early hours of the morning. The sounds were not that of farm animals, but rather a bustling city, car exhausts, and crowds of people. He was on the sidewalk, surrounded by neon lights, skyscrapers, and cars. Huang began wandering around the unfamiliar area and picking up some signs. Nanjing Shopping Center read one, Nanjing Restaurant read another. He would later come across a large lake, and he soon realized that he was in Nanjing, which was located almost 500 miles away. It would take him 7 hours to arrive there by car. As he walked around aimlessly, Huang was stopped by 2 officers who then gave him a ticket to Shanghai. They told him that they'd be waiting for him there and that he'd be placed in a camp. 11 hours from his home, Huang told his story to a PLA soldier, which subsequently led to the creation of the telegram that the village received at 9 a.m. His arrival in Nanjing and his subsequent movements were deemed impossible. A train would have taken Huang a day to reach Nanjing, and aviation travel was ruled out as a possibility since it was far too expensive for the farmer to afford. This would not be the last time that he would make an inexplicable trip hours away from his home, leaving behind an enduring mystery that would never be solved. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.